This is an episode of my podcast, Self-Love and Spiritual Growth. You can find links to my podcast in the description below. Thank you for listening. Welcome to Self-Love and Spiritual Growth with Natasha Hynes, where I remind you that you came here to be the light in a dark world. So yeah, sometimes it's gonna hurt. Sometimes it might even feel like you're not gonna make it through, but you can. And you will. You're doing better than you even know. Welcome to Self-Love and Spiritual Growth with myself, Natasha Hynes. Today we're going to be talking about emotional purging for and during the Ascension process. A lot of you have probably been feeling very triggered lately, very emotional, and you might have noticed that a lot of other people are also being triggered very easily. Like, I have been on the internet for quite some time now, as many of you have, and the internet, places like Facebook and so on, where you can leave comments and interact with each other, have, for the most part, always been very conducive of arguments and trolling and so on. But nowadays, it seems like people are very easily emotionally triggered, more than they have been in the past. In the past, it felt like we wanted to argue because we thought that our perspective was the right perspective, or we were misunderstanding and miscommunicating. Nowadays, it feels more like we're offended. And I know there's lots of jokes on the internet about people being easily offended and how you can't even make a joke anymore because people will be offended. And it's almost like they think, or some people think or believe that the reason people are being so easily offended is either a personal choice or because they're privileged or spoiled or whatever. But there's actually something deeper going on here, and we're going to talk about that. Some people don't believe in the ascension process because they don't understand what it is. It is not a belief. It is an actual natural process that's scientifically measurable. And I'm not going to get into the depth of what the ascension process is in this podcast because I want to stay on topic. But I do have a YouTube channel where I am exploring the concepts and describing things and explaining them to the best of my abilities. If you want to check that out, I'm going to link the channel in the description. But what's happening right now is that the Earth is, or the entire solar system rather, is passing through a photon belt. And as we enter this photon belt, which takes a process of about 1,000 years to get into the center of it, is what I understand, what I've been told, and about 2,000 years for the entire progression through it. So things are only going to get way more intense, because as we start moving into this photon belt, we are being bombarded with all these photons, hence why it's called a photon belt. For those of you who don't know, photons are particles of light, and that energy is making people crazy. There's also other influences of energy, and when I say energy, when we say the energies, it sounds very woo-woo and intangible and like someone's using their imagination, but what it is actual particles that are actually penetrating the earth and us and are affecting us on every level. We are, never mind just the biological aspects of how we're affected, but we have an electromagnetic field that's measurable and emitted from our hearts. The earth has its own electromagnetic field, and everything affects everything else. So when we're bombarded by all these particles of light, of energy, we are actually being physically affected by them. So they are physically affecting us, which is also emotionally affecting us and psychologically affecting us. And those effects are what we're going to talk about today. If you don't know what the Schumann resonance is, it is the resonance, meaning the sound frequency, that's emitted between the Earth and the ionosphere, from what I understand. If that's not correct, feel free to correct me. So in the Earth's atmosphere, and it's caused by lightning hitting the Earth and reverberating and causing a frequency. Now that frequency changes, and it's measurable and measured. You can go online and you can look up the live graph for the Schumann resonance, and every day there are measurements taken of the Schumann resonance. And you can see that on some days it is much more intense than others. There are spikes in the resonance, and on days where there are spikes, I've noticed that there's actually a direct correlation between spikes in the Schumann resonance and people acting crazy, people attacking other people for being offended and getting angry, and miscommunications, and it's just thoroughly crazy. And since about April till about now, being August of 2019, there was a general raise of the Schumann resonance. So overall, from April till about now, if you look at the graph, you'll notice that there has been an intensity overall of the Schumann resonance. And that's the period of time that we've all been feeling extremely emotional and exhausted and having all sorts of weird symptoms. Then on days where there are spikes in the Schumann resonance, it's like the full moon on steroids, where people are just acting nutballs. And at first I thought that it was the resonance causing us to act that way, as if because the frequency changed, that the frequency change was what was affecting us. Now what I understand is that the frequency is just a reflection or a symptom of all these photons hitting the Earth. So the Schumann resonance is really just a way of visually reflecting what we're going through. But it's actually the energy coming in, hitting us and hitting the Earth and hitting the sun and hitting the entire solar system, that's causing us to act crazy, and also causing a spike in the Schumann resonance. So what do we do with that? Do we just hold on tight and wait it out? No, there's actually a purpose for this. There is an opportunity in this. And this is affecting us one way or another. This is the ascension process. The ascension process is a natural process. Just as gravity is natural, inertia is natural, so is the ascension process. It's not just a belief system. It's happening to everyone, whether they want to accept it or believe it or not. And if you're willing to accept it, then you can learn to understand it and learn to understand what's happening to you and to everyone else, and then take advantage of the opportunity that these triggers present you. Because these triggers present you the opportunity to understand, to shine light on your shadows, on your shadow self, to understand all the things within you that are unhealed, traumas that need to be dealt with, fears, negative beliefs that need to be purged. And by purged, what I mean is they come to the surface, so we are somehow triggered, or maybe nothing actually happens and we're just sitting there and suddenly become extremely emotional or whatever. But these feelings are coming to the surface, and if we choose to face them, if we choose to look at them, and by looking at them, what we're doing is shining a light on it. So shining the light on your shadow self is an analogy for actually looking at the things within you that you may not like, that you may not want to see, that may not want to be seen. But you have to look at them so that you can heal them. You bring them to the surface, you look at them, and you heal them. Because if you don't look at them, and the alternative is that you ignore them, you shove them down, you pretend that they're not there. And what does that mean? You're refusing to acknowledge things that are part of you that are not serving you. And if you refuse to acknowledge them, if you ignore them or neglect them, they don't go away. They're still there. They're still there. And what they do is they fester in the back of your mind and cause you pain every day of your entire life until the day that you choose to heal them. It's like what I said in the last episode about how facing your pain seems scary because it's painful, right? But if you don't face your pain, if you don't stop, turn around and look at what's hurting you, and instead you just keep running away from it, it's attached to you. It's a part of you. So you can run and run and run, but you can't run away from yourself. You can't run away from your arm or your leg. It's a part of you. So, yes, looking at the things that are painful will hurt when you acknowledge that they're there because you're acknowledging your pain. But if you're not looking at it and you're running from it, you're suffering. You're still in pain, but for a longer period of time, which is suffering. If you choose to look at your pain, then you can learn to understand where it's coming from, what's causing it, and let it go. Once you learn the lesson, once you get a different perspective on what is causing you the pain to the point where you understand that you understand it in a way that stops causing you the pain, then the pain goes away forever. Whereas if you refuse to look at it and face your pain and you run, all that happens is that you will suffer. You will continue to feel pain every day. But you will try to numb it or ignore it. So how do you do that? You develop addictions of all kinds, not just drugs, not just alcohol. Could be sex, could be other people, could be dating, because that feeling of infatuation, the elation that you get, attention that you get from other people, that's very good at distracting you from your problems. You can even just be a workaholic. That was one of my biggest things, my go-to to just work myself into a burnout. Video games. There's all kinds of things that you can do to distract yourself from your pain. And when you use that thing to distract yourself from your pain, and you recognize that when you do it, you're not feeling the pain because you're not paying attention to the pain, then that thing is very likely going to become some form of addiction. Because if you stop doing the thing, then you start feeling the pain. So you do more of the thing. That's why addictions are not just broken by stopping the thing. The real way to stop it is to face your pain and heal your trauma. And people don't want to face their stuff. They don't want to face it. And in that resistance causes them to stay in addiction. So when you are triggered, that's the perfect opportunity to ask yourself, why am I feeling triggered? Why am I feeling this? Why am I feeling angry? Without jumping to the it's their fault. Let's just make an assumption that everything that pisses us off is always the other person's fault. Now we can let that go. Now we can move on to, why do I feel bad when they do that thing? Never mind whose fault it is. Why do I feel the way I feel when they do that thing? Because remember, no one can make you feel anything. You choose to feel anything. You have total control over your feelings, over the way you feel. It may not feel like that because we're triggered. So things happen or things are said and we have a knee-jerk reaction to things, and then we just assume that the reason we acted or reacted was because the other person was doing something mean or being unjust or being disrespectful and so on. And they may have been. A lot of the time they are. A lot of the time the other person is doing something not so great. But that is irrelevant to why you feel how you feel. How you feel is directly related to how you interpret the meaning of the thing that they did. So someone can do something really garbage. Whether the person did something crap or not, perspective will help you get a grip on your own reaction to it. What does it mean to me? What does it mean about me? I'll give you an example of something that happened recently. Someone on one of the Ascension related Facebook groups left a post saying something to the effect of, I've noticed a lot of people posting publicly on Facebook, bad-mouthing or judging or putting people on blast. Why are they doing that? Is that like an ego thing, or are they like searching for validation or whatever? And what I saw in that post was the very obvious hypocrisy, because this person was putting people on blast for putting people on blast. Okay. And I told her this post is hypocritical, but she couldn't see it or refused to see it. In her mind, she was a better person than them, or she had less ego than them, or she wasn't looking for validation because she was simply making an observation. But she wasn't just making an observation. She was biasing what she was seeing, and she was posting her biased perspective publicly to get validation from people to tell her, yeah, you're right. It was literal hypocrisy. The point of bringing that up is because she could have looked at the same situation of people putting people on blast, and the reasons that she saw that might be causing people to put others on blast was either ego, validation, or something else that was also negative. They were all negative reasons. You would never, in her mind, what she seemed to be saying was that you would never put anyone on public blast for a positive reason. So that was her perspective. Just as we read comments or hear people say things or see people do things, and then we interpret the reason that they're doing it. We think we understand why they're doing it, what their thought process is, and what kind of a person that makes them. But you can also see the exact same people posting, putting people on blast because they are finally becoming able to express themselves. They are unapologetically voicing their opinion. They are learning to stand up for unjust things. There's a lot of positive things you could extrapolate from the exact same scenario. So what you assume is a reasoning for people to do things or say things is a perspective, it's a perception, it's your opinion. And because you have an opinion that could have a negative bias, you can be offended. So she's seeing people posting, putting people on blast, making a negative assumption about why they're doing it. And so she's offended, she's confused, she's motivated to complain about it, or motivated to publicly express her observation of it. Okay? But she wouldn't be motivated by it unless it affected her in some way. So she was doing the exact thing that she was criticizing. And I'm going to use the word criticize here and not observe, because if she was simply observing, she would not have a negative bias to her reasoning. She would have saw both sides as possibilities because she would be unbiased. If you're truly observing in a non-judgmental way, you are non-biased. As soon as you are biased, it becomes some sort of a judgment, whether you are judging it as good or bad. So she was doing the exact thing that she was criticizing other people for. And that's a perfect example of what we all do. But the other way around, we criticize people for doing things that represent things that we don't want to be, but probably are on some level, or have been in the past. So I've had trouble seeing people in abusive relationships with narcissists, and I'd be very confused about why they wouldn't just leave. Just leave. If you know he's a narcissist, why don't you just leave? If you recognize that this is abusive, why don't you just leave? Just, right? I'm making a judgment. And the reason I did that was because I had been in abusive relationships with narcissists. And when I was there, I made bad decisions because I was stuck for whatever reasons. I was brainwashed. I was trauma bonded. And then when I finally moved past it, I regretted the fact that I stayed for so long, or that I didn't listen to myself when I saw the red flags. I didn't like the part of myself that didn't know what I know now. I was judging myself. And in judging myself, I find reasons to judge others. This is why everything that triggers us, everything that we judge others for, that we criticize in others, that angers us, that we hate others for, is always a reflection of something going on within us that needs to be healed. Even if we're judging the worst scum of the universe. And again, I am not saying that the person who is angering us or triggering us is not doing something crappy. They might very likely be doing something crappy. That's irrelevant to our ability to understand the reasoning behind our feelings and why we feel them and healing ourselves. Okay, it's irrelevant. It's irrelevant to the being triggered. You should be able to observe people doing crappy things without becoming triggered, without becoming hyper emotional to the best of your ability. Ideally, that's where we're aiming. Being triggered is not to be confused with having empathy. You can be emotionally triggered by something because you have empathy for whoever is suffering from it. But that is not the same thing as being offended or becoming angry or hating or whatever other negative emotion is triggered by something because of what it says about you. So you have a choice in every moment to choose between using these triggers as an opportunity to heal and looking within yourself and letting go and doing the work as we go through this ascension process. Or you can choose to not do any of that and just think you're going to ride the wave through and you don't have any work to do. And some people are going to choose the other end of the spectrum where they choose to hold on to the resentment and the blame and the anger, and they go into that direction where the reason that they're feeling triggered or feeling angry is because it's the other person's fault, and refusing to look at themselves and to take responsibility. And people do not need to know about the ascension process or be spiritual or any of that in order to choose the one where they look inside and take responsibility. Okay? Any person, no matter what they believe, will be triggered at different points, as we have always been, and may choose to take responsibility or to blame. And it is in choosing whether to take responsibility and do the work and heal and let go, or to blame and ignore and push down and push back and keep going after the ego-based things that make them feel better, that dive deep into the addictions. It's in that choice that we are also choosing which timeline or set of timelines, depending on how you look at it, that we are heading down. Because as many of you know, and if you don't know, you're about to know, the timelines are splitting. I'm not going to get into parallel universes and how time works and all that in this podcast, but there is a split right now happening in the timelines where, as we go through the ascension process, there are people headed to a utopian type future and people who are headed to a dystopian type future. There is no in between. And in choosing whether or not to take responsibility is how we are choosing which timeline we end up on. And the choices have to be made now. Like today now. Like yesterday now. You can't keep going, blaming and pushing, and then in 3, 6, 9, 12 months from now, you finally decide you're going to do your self-work because it'll be too late. Now, if you're thinking about people that you know that have a negative mentality or have a blame everybody else, it's not my fault mentality, and you're thinking that they're probably going to end up on the negative timeline, depending on who it is, you could be right. However, in my experience, because I've known about this for many years, and I have been also, because I didn't really understand up until now how this is going to work out, I was very worried about some of my family members not making the shift with me. But I have noticed right now, as we get to the cusp of the timeline split, I've noticed that a couple of the people, one or two of those people that I had been worried about in the past, who I didn't understand to what depth of negativity they were, are definitely gonna either be on the negative timeline or die and reincarnate somewhere else or whatever. But a lot of the people that we are worried about are having a dramatic shift in consciousness right now. So some of my relatives who I never thought would wake up, and I was really worried about them, are having sudden major changes in the way that they think and they act. Like people who used to, not even long ago, ridiculed me for being vegan and got upset when I would make vegan meals, are now becoming vegan. They're changing so fast, so dramatically, and you might be noticing shifts in people around you as well. The best thing to do is just to live by example, not to force anything on anyone, because everyone has an individual choice to make. Not everyone is ready for this, and they are going to want to stay in third density. And again, I'm not going to get into the depth of that in this podcast, but you know what? A lot of these things that I'm touching on, you might be interested in. Check out my YouTube channel where I'm going to be discussing these ascension type topics in depth. So live by example. Speak your truth without trying to control other people. Don't try to make other people see things how you see them. Just speak your truth and allow other people to not believe you, to judge you, to get angry, to be afraid. Let them feel their feelings and let them go through that process. But if you just speak your truth, then you could be planting important seeds in them that could blossom into something of a major shift in their consciousness. Or you could be allowing them to process their own feelings until they finally get to the point where they can accept what you're saying, where they're no longer experiencing cognitive dissonance, and then finally feel safe enough to talk about this stuff because they'll know that you're a weirdo like I am. And then they'll feel less inhibited to talk about it with you. But it's not any of our place to try to fix or control or make anyone do anything. Even jerks are going to tip over, not all jerks, but even people who some of us perceive as jerks are going to tip onto the positive timeline in the very near future. You're going to see them change and it's going to blow your mind. The people that tip over to the negative timeline, that's what they need to experience. Don't worry about them. They need to experience it. It's for their own benefit in the bigger picture in the long run. All of the things that we are feeling hurt about or angry about or jealous about, all the things we are feeling negative about, all come down to self-love. They all show us ways in which we are not loving ourselves enough. And yes, it's about loving ourselves, not how much we love other people. It's about loving ourselves. Because when you love yourself is when you can truly love other people. It's in lack of our own self-love that we have difficulty being truly loving to other people. It's when we feel unworthy or we judge ourselves and so on that we criticize and judge others, that we hold back on how much we love them. Hurt people hurt people. When we hurt other people, or when other people hurt us, it always comes down to how we are hurt or how they are hurt. So when we hurt other people, it's because we are hurting. When other people hurt us, it's because they are hurting. And we hurt because we know, part of us knows that we are worthy of love and respect, and that we are inherently worthy. But there is a separation between what we know to be true and our flawed belief systems. What we know and what we believe are not always the same, and when there is that incongruency, it causes us pain. When we know something, it's because our soul knows. It is out being in touch with who we truly are. It is being connected to source. That is our knowing. When we believe something, it is a program that is running in our subconscious or conscious mind. When we change our beliefs to match our knowing, is when we find peace. And that is how we work through the triggers. I hope this episode served you. Please subscribe if you haven't subscribed. Check out my website. It's linked in the description, where you can find free stuff like my course Self-Love for Empaths, my 5-day self-love challenge, or my self-love guided meditation. They're all free. You can also find my social media links there, where you can give me some feedback, ask me questions, whatever. If you want to book a session, I have a free trial option as well that you can check out on my website. My website is natashahynes.com, NatashaHynes.com. Thank you for joining me today, and I will see you next time. Bye.